Hello. I think I'm live, so please put a comment in the chat, and I'm very happy to answer questions that people have on the paper one, Britain 1625 to 1701. Hopefully it was a useful activity last week to go through some questions with people. I thought it was fun. So yeah, let me know if you can hear me okay, and if you can see me as well. So just the purpose of this session, if people hadn't seen last week's, is for you to just ask questions on paper one. It could be exam technique, it could be content related. Just fire away, ask any questions, and it might be a past question that you're not sure on how to structure. It might be on just giving some tips for the exam. Could be something on content. So I'm just going to see, hopefully you can see me okay. I'm just going to try and work out from my phone if this is working. Oh gosh, somebody's leaving a comment. So I can see that a comment here from the chosen one. Thanks for coming along. I know it's not the same as civil rights. We say covering a wider time period scores higher marks. Yes, that's a really good question. Really good question. If you get when you get a kind of breadth question that covers 25 to 88, I would strongly suggest that you try and cover that period. So think about when you're writing your paragraphs, if you're doing it in factors, for example, within your factors, within your paragraphs, doing a kind of early, middle, late within that, seeing if you can cover kind of 25 to 42 to 60, and then 60 to 88. So definitely trying to cover the whole period. I think that's a really good question. So think about that when you're planning your questions. Have I covered all of the time frame? Obviously, for some paragraphs, you might not have evidence from like the later period or right at the start, and don't worry about it as long as the essay as a whole has got that kind of coverage. So I hope that answers, but really good question. Okay, all right. Wow, there's quite a few questions. Thanks for coming along, folks, and I hope this is going to be useful. Right, this is a kind of classic question that people often ask about. How would you go about the question? How far do you agree that Anglicanism overcame challenges to its doctrines and practices? So you've got to define what it means for Anglicanism to overcome challenges to its doctrines and practices. So the way that I would probably structure this, and the way I suggest to structure this is, and this is one of the rare ones for this paper, for paper 3, and I will do a live session, I think, on paper 3 on the civil rights paper. I'm not sure on the day, but I will do that at some point. For paper 3, there's more examples of this, but this is one example where I would do by time period. I would actually do it by 25 to 42, 42 to 60, 60 to 88. And within each of those time periods, I would talk about what the challenges to Anglicanism were and how far the church actually overcame those challenges. So paragraph 1, talking about kind of Laudian reform and the backlash to Laudian reform. Largely, that's kind of what I would talk about. Obviously, I'm not going to go into too much detail because there's lots of questions here, but maybe if there's something specific, you could ask me about it later. But kind of backlash to Laudian reform, that would be a challenge. Paragraph 2, so the kind of war in the Republic, so just the challenge to the church that basically after 1650, the church as a kind of institution didn't exist in the same way. So I think there's a lot you could say about that. And then finally, the kind of failure of the Clarendon Code would be paragraph 3. And my argument for that would certainly be that it didn't overcome challenges to its doctrines and practices, very effectively, at least, that by 1689, we had the Toleration Act that kind of had to be passed. So that's what I would probably say. I hope that's useful, Kelsey. Thanks for that. It's a really good question. So, right, let's have a look here. Right, loads of questions. So please bear with me. Thanks for coming along. Thanks, John Wick. Thanks. I'm happy to do this. Right, here we go. Next one. In case of emergency, what are some general social change points to fall back on. So one thing I've noticed from the past questions is that there hasn't been a question on a kind of factors question on social change. Now, I don't know whether I've got zero insider information. I don't know if that'll come up, but I would certainly say thinking about the social change topic in terms of kind of the factors that cause social change. So kind of war, legislation, population growth, and ideas. They're the kind of four big ones. So for within each of those, thinking about some evidence. So what did the war do? So you could talk about the role of women and how that changed in the war. People like Mary Banks. Also in the war and the Republic, you could talk about the explosion of dissent and radicalism. So there's lots you could say about that. In terms of legislation, you've got legislation about the poor, the Settlement Act 62. You've got the Toleration Act 1650. Kind of counterpoints, you've got like the Blasphemy Act of 1650, the Clarendon Code, things that kind of tried to crush the dissent. Population growth, lots of those statistics on how society grew and how that caused more poverty. And then ideas, obviously you've got like the Royal Society, the growth of kind of radicals and things about kind of Puritans and Quakers advocating women's education. So that's how I would kind of come down on that question or on that topic, and trying to think about how I would structure my revision on that. So I hope that's kind of what you're looking for, Rory. Sorry if that was a bit too broad. This is a good question, Samara. Thanks. I'm saying they're all good questions. I kind of, hopefully you could tell I'm kind of interested in this stuff. So what would be valid criteria for how far did social structure transform? So social structure is the structure, the hierarchies within society, and the extent to which different groups moved within the structure of society more broadly, the extent to which people's status changed, perhaps. For that question, I would probably advise doing that by talking about different people. So in terms of social structure, what happened to the status of women? What happened to poverty and poor people? What happened to the gentry, nobility, merchants, professional class? That could be another paragraph. And then to what extent did things change for those groups? Obviously your it's entirely up to your view and what you think based on the evidence that I would probably be of a mind to say that largely it didn't transform, but again, it's entirely your view. So I hope that helped, Samara. Please let me know if you need more detail. But yeah, please keep. Oh gosh, there's lots of questions coming in. Right, I'll try and do some. I think I'll take too long, don't I? So I'll try and be quicker. Right, Cassie, significant. How significant do you think the Anglo-Dutch Wars are outside of development and trade? That's another great question. This is fantastic. Right. So in terms of the Anglo-Dutch Wars, for the first Anglo-Dutch War, I think the key thing to know about that is that it cost money. So all wars cost money, right? The Anglo-Dutch Wars, so the first one during the Republic costs money, and it means that the Parliament, which if I think I'm right in saying it's the Rump at that time, was forced to implement the monthly assessment tax, which was very similar to shipped money. So that's the first. So the first Anglo-Dutch War, I think you're probably going to talk about that. The second and third Anglo-Dutch Wars are important in terms of the political impacts, because they are examples of pro-French foreign policy. So they're not particularly popular wars. They don't go very well, so I was going to go off on a tangent, but I'm not going to, because I've got lots of questions. And you can link it to kind of foreign affairs in that later period, and the link to kind of fear of Catholicism or dislike of Catholicism more broadly. Because they weren't popular, they cost money, and also they gave Parliament kind of leverage over Charles II. So things like his you know, his Declaration of Indulgence, the Second Declaration, 72, you know, he relies on Parliament. So he has to let them do things that they want to do that he doesn't want them to do, like the Test Act as well. So you can link that kind of power balance. I hope that helps. So this is one that I kind of, question from Callum about the success of the evolution of the church. It's entirely down to your success criteria. I would personally say, based on my kind of reading and knowledge of this period, that I think it'd be quite well. You could argue that the evolution of the church was a success. It was still in place as the national church. But I would probably, even if the question went up to 88, I think it would be relevant to talk about 89 and the Toleration Act and how that was needed at that point, and that shows that the church hadn't successfully evolved, that dissent had grown to a point where it couldn't be, you couldn't put the lid back on it. Basically, the Clarendon Code had failed. But it's entirely up to you. If you define, you know, successful evolution as the dominant church with the majority of population worshipping, you know, within, then that's successful, I guess. So yeah, it's up to you. And I don't think an examiner, unless it's invalid criteria, unless you say something that's just not a relevant way of thinking about it, I think you'd be fine. So I hope that's okay. Let's have a look. So, do I need to add similarities, correlations between the extracts, or only differences in section C? Similarities is useful, definitely, to mention that. Correlations is useful, and talking about differences is really key. But definitely, if you can see, you know, they both agree that the Glorious Revolution did have some revolutionary effects, but extract 1 says it was more political, whereas extract 2 says it was more economic. I think that's fine. That's a really good thing to do. So definitely kind of similarities, correlations is a really useful thing to do there. Differences is usually the thing that makes the answers stand out, I would say, and kind of you've really got into the nature of the debate. But definitely you can discuss similarities there. I'd probably, you know, in the conclusion, that would be the way I would kind of where I would put that in. Okay. So, is it likely on section B, both the social change can come up, or is it always going to be trade or social? So, in all past papers, in every past paper and on the specimen paper, it was section B has always been social change and economy, one social change and one economy. Now, it doesn't say anywhere that it has to be that way. I think we can assume it's going to be that way, but I would definitely revise both. Okay, I don't think it's worth taking a risk thinking it's, you know, it's always been that way, so I don't have to revise topic, you know, the economy topic. I think you should, just in case. I think I mentioned this last week, that in a paper I taught, something similar happened and we kind of assumed it was always going to be one way, and then it wasn't, and it was a bit of a shock. So I'd always revise both. You're probably going to have your preferences, but definitely revise both. But it always has been that way. So it's probably going to be a topic 3 and a topic 4, but I really don't want to say that it's definitely going to be. And then somebody says, you told me. So yeah, revise both to be sure. Right, let's have a look. Yeah, this is a really interesting question, Jaren. Thanks for asking. So there's a difference between kind of toleration and this kind of godly reformation. In my understanding of it, is that it was like you could worship however you wanted, but within the parameters of kind of this kind of Puritan lifestyle. So they didn't want, so the rule of the major generals and the kind of godly reformation that was attempted is more like banning the things that they didn't want to see in terms of gambling, doing things on Sundays, you know, celebrations, you know, kind of celebrating Christmas and things like that, or the kind of festivals and things. So it was still kind of tolerant in the sense you could worship, you know, outside of an established church, but it was more just, we don't want you to do these certain acts or be blasphemous in this way. So that's how I would kind of think of it. So I hope that's okay. Right, let's. This is a really good question, Sophie. Right, I'm going to stop saying they're good questions because they're all good questions. Just assume that that's what I think. There hasn't been a question for quite a while on the years 40 to 49. And again, I've got no insider information. I don't know if it's going to come up. It might not. I don't know if you could get a question just on the Civil War, and there has been a past question. I can't remember the year off the top of my head, but there was a question on kind of failure to compromise 40 to 49. So that period, I would definitely make sure I've revised that and you've got a good knowledge of that. I don't think if you look at the specification, you're going to get a question just on the war. It's more likely to be about the kind of political instability of this period from, say, 40 to 49 or 42 to 49, although that would be quite narrow, or 42 to 53 or something, it's if you look at the specification, it's always going to be about the kind of political instability, failure to compromise, that kind of thing. But that period, the war period, definitely could come up. I'd really make sure I revise that. Okay. Thanks, Alice. I will say it's a good question. Really, yeah, this is a kind of classic question. Again, Clarendon Code hasn't come up. Definitely revise this one. This is a really good good question to revise. So, how successful was the Clarendon Code in achieving its goals? So, what do you have to define? I'm not able to see the bottom. I can see, Kelsey, you've just said thank you for answering my other question. So that's great. Sorry, I'm kind of still in the earlier. I'm still in the earlier questions. So what you've got to define, and if this was a class, I'd be like, come on, tell me what have we got to define? You've got to define what the goals of the Clarendon Code were. So my idea for this, and I am slightly dubious about the third paragraph, but I still think I could get away with it, and I still think you could get away with it. I would say the goals of the Clarendon Code were to restore Anglican supremacy. So that could be one paragraph where you could talk about the Act of Uniformity and the Corporation Act, for example. The second paragraph, I would talk about to kind of crush dissent, or to deal with dissent, however you want to put it. And you could talk about the other acts of the Clarendon Code, so the Conventicle Act and the 5 Mile Act. Maybe you could bring in the Quaker Act, even though it's not officially part of the Clarendon Code. And then paragraph 3, and this is where I'm not as confident on this in terms of, I think I'd have to kind of explain this one a bit. I am confident, but I'd have to explain it a bit, is the desire, another goal was the desire to wipe out Catholic influence. And I'd talk about the fact that the Clarendon Code excluded Catholics, and then I would talk about how in the years following that, actually Catholic influence kind of increased because of Charles and James being sympathetic to Catholicism. So that's how I would do that one. It's quite a narrow question, but again, the Clarendon Code hasn't come up, so I would definitely make sure I revise that. Right, let's have a look here. Oh, sorry, I've just missed a question. So what was the impact of banking on trading? Well, really, it's about investment, Stella. I think that's the main thing, that people were able to invest and invest in different areas. So you can link it to development in agriculture, national markets, overseas. So people are able to take out loans and therefore invest. So that's really it in a nutshell. And you can make those useful links to the other areas. So I hope that's okay. Just a quick response. Lucille, thanks for the question. What context would you use it? Introduction for topic 3 and 4 essays. It depends on the precise question, but in terms of social change, something about what could we say in terms of social change? I mean, it depends on, if you got a question just on the poor, for example, or just on the role of women, then you're going to talk about, how far things change for them. This period sees, I mean, you can bring in some nice words like this period, sees, tumultuous, political instability or tumultuous social change or something like that. And topic 4, something about how this period sees, increasing agricultural efficiency, a development of kind of overseas growth of London, things like that. So there are probably going to be some key things that you would say, but it really depends on the exact question. I would try and make my context very much relate to what the exact question is asking, rather than just a broad point. So got another question on, could there be two social questions on section B? So as I said before, there could be. I don't think it will happen, because it's never happened, but just because it's never happened doesn't mean that it never will. So it could. I would assume it's not, but I would definitely revise all topics for that reason. Okay, let's have a look. This is a kind of interesting one. If you've got any advice on writing in general, struggle with writing. The key thing with this, Logan, is planning beforehand. So make sure you plan your answer before you write it. You know, what are my 3 paragraphs going to be? I mean, I always kind of aim for 3, but what are my 3 paragraphs going to be? What's my argument going to be? What's my evidence going to be in those paragraphs? And you know, you don't have to write it out in full, every single piece of evidence, but just brief points if you need to, and then you've got something to look back to. That's it. And when you revised up, you know, by Wednesday morning, you know, hopefully you'll be fully revised. You'll feel like you know it. You'll have it all in your head. You put down a plan, 5 minutes to plan for section A, 5 minutes for B, 10 minutes maybe for C. You know, it's planning them out first and then going back to that. That's really, really important. Yeah, that's what I would say. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully I kind of answered this before. A question about society depends on the exact question, but the different factors like war, like causes of social change, war, legislation, population growth, ideas, that would be one that I would kind of think about. Frida, thanks for the question. Do you think there could be a question about scientific developments? That was last year. I'd be very, very surprised if a question on scientific developments came up again, because there was that question last year. I don't know if everybody's seen it, but it was on the Royal Society and the scientific revolution. So kind of the Royal Society was the factor given for the scientific revolution. I would be very surprised if that came up again. Whether it could be what we thought last year when we had the kind of sample material, the guidance, we wondered whether there could be a question on something like which was the most significant development in ideas, and then you weigh up scientific developments against other ideas in this period. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like this would be more within a paragraph on ideas compared to other causes of social change. There could be a comparison question, maybe, you know, on how far do you agree ideas were more important in causing social change than legislation? And then you talk about scientific developments within the point on ideas, maybe. Yeah. Let's have a look. So this is another one that I've seen before. So to what extent was the active uniformity responsible for the survival of dissent? Hope I'm not going too fast now. I don't know. Sorry, I'm kind of. Let me know. So if I'm going too fast, I feel like I don't want people to kind of miss it. So, to what extent was the active uniformity responsible for the survival of dissent? So it depends on the dates, Jerin. It really just depends on the dates for that question. If it was, you know, if it was kind of 60. If it was kind of 60 to 88, or if it was 25 to 88, or 50 to 88, it depends on the dates. But you know, active uniformity could broadly come under a paragraph on the Clarendon Code and the failure of the Clarendon Code. It narrows the church too much, therefore creates more dissent. And then you could talk about other causes of the survival of dissent, like actions of individuals, monarchs. You know, that's a question that came up a couple of times on Charles II and James II and their actions. You could also do, if it goes back, you could talk about, the Toleration Act and the Republic and this kind of the reason for the explosion of dissent. Whilst I think that's more than 3, I think, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I would do. So hopefully that makes sense. Would there be a question solely on the Anglo-Dutch Wars? I'd be surprised at that. One, because within the political topic, it's not, they're not I mean, I'd be very surprised, Minna, if that came up. I mean, you know, I can't think of a way that would be worded. I mean, could it be something on after the Restoration? How far do you agree the Anglo-Dutch Wars were the most significant cause of political instability, 60 to 88, or 60 to 85 or something? The most significant problems that Charles II faced could be, but I'd be surprised at that. And then you just talk about other causes of instability. I don't think you would get a question just on Anglo-Dutch Wars for the economy. You could get a question on Anglo-Dutch rivalry. That's one that I've definitely planned out with my students before, kind of Anglo-Dutch rivalry as a factor in causing overseas expansion. And then you talk about navigation acts, you know, Anglo-Dutch Wars. Even the East India Company was formed in, you know, partially in response to the Dutch East India Company. So you could use that. But I don't know if a political question, unless the one I said after the, you know, the second and third Anglo-Dutch Wars, I'd be surprised, but maybe. Okay. Thanks, Samara. I'm pleased that helped. That's great. How many times do you recommend we quote the sources and interpretations question? So the first thing is I try not to call them sources, call them interpretations or extracts or the surname of the author. And I would say three per paragraph. Right. I'm trying to speed up because I can see there's loads of I'm not doing a live, sorry, for Russia, Lenin to Yeltsin. I do know this a bit, but that paper a little bit. But if you've got interpretations questions, just generally on technique, you feel free to ask a question here. Also, I've done a video on that. So I think it might be my most recent video other than the live. So just have a look for it. It's on the channel. In topic 4, can you use the Navigation Act as evidence for the Anglo-Dutch Wars? Yeah, the cause of mercantilism as a cause of Anglo-Dutch rivalry. Definitely. No problem, Cassie. Thanks. No problem, Callum. Let's have a look. This is a good one. So do you have any key phrases we can include in our essays to make our argument more convincing? So there are some key terms, and I've got a video, actually. It's like 7 A-star tips, something like that. And I'm surprised that it hasn't, I mean, it's got quite a few views, but not as many as I thought it kind of would, because I think I talk about that in there. You know, I think it's quite a good one. But kind of things like, you know, transformative, widespread, you know, I love the word catalyst, symbolic, you know, using these kind of phrases that help you weigh up why one factor is more important than another, why something is more significant than something else. I think I've also got a video on understanding A-level history questions, which goes through all of those things. So I definitely have a look at those. You know, unprecedented, you know, those kind of words, probably said that already, but those kind of words that you can kind of bring in to it's thinking about the basis for your argument. Why is my argument the case? You know, think about how you can make that convincing, because this factor is more important than something else because it was unprecedented, or it catalyzed the other factors, you know, or you know, it influenced on a more widespread level, or something like that. Okay. I did just answer this one, Hannah. So hopefully you heard that, but if not, yeah. Basically, active uniformity and Clarendon Code, maybe Toleration Act 1650, and then either actions of dissenters or actions of monarchs, Charles II and James II. Yes, you can use the same knowledge for different quotes. You know, if you're coming at it from a different angle, you can definitely. You know, there's lots you can say about something like the Bill of Rights. There's lots that you can say about the Triennial Act. You know, you could talk about that from both sides, couldn't you? You know, so definitely you can. But I wouldn't talk about it too much. And if it's only if you can't think of anything else. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a useful way of thinking about it. Sophie, kind of revising the indicative content. Yeah, and you know, a good revision strategy might be trying to plan them out yourself and think about what evidence you would use, and then looking at the indicative content of the mark schemes and seeing how close you got to that. That's a good thing to do for sure. Year 12 mocks. Here we go. So How should we fit the whole course in? Break it down by factor. So just think about what are the key factors in causing instability, 25 to 42, 42 to 60, 60 to 88. Just breaking the topics down into the kind of factors. That's what I would say. I've got some revision videos, I think, where I do that. So check those out if you haven't already. Good luck with the mocks. All right. Thanks, Jerry, for that. Kelsey, I did mention this one before, so I'll just quickly do it. I would say for the structure of society question, I would probably do it by different groups. So the poor, women, the gentry, nobility, professional class, merchants. I'd probably put that all in one. That's how I would do it. The structure of society. I would talk about different groups within society. Yeah, that's how I would structure that one. Oh, I don't think you can do coursework on. No, you can maybe do coursework on the Stuarts as long as you don't do it on the Glorious Revolution. Yeah, if your school lets you do it on the Stuarts, I mean, interpretations of Charles I, that'd be phenomenal. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Lots of good. I did a video on did Charles I deserve his fate or something. You know, you could look at that. How to answer, how significant was imperial expansion? Yeah, so that's a factors question. So imperial expansion, paragraph 1, and then different causes of the development of the economy. So agriculture, cloth, banking and insurance. Yeah, so just do that as a factors question. Sorry, I'm trying to kind of keep up with the messages. So sorry if I'm going quick, but let's have a look. If you do a paragraph on growth of poverty, what would you talk about? So I would talk about kind of population growth, and there are some statistics in the textbook there on the growth of poverty related to population growth and how kind of inflation outstripped wages, the numbers of people who were arrested for vagrancy or fined for vagrancy, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's what I would kind of talk about in that one, Frida. So growth of poverty, there's those kind of statistics, the number of people who lived on the poverty line, those kind of things. Was it two-thirds comes to mind from somewhere? I hope that's all right. Growth, yeah, that's what I would say. Those kind of statistics, that's what I'd look at. Oh gosh, this is, to what extent was a restoration settlement only a short-term solution to the problems of government and religion? So you need to break that down. You know, you need to define what do we mean by problems of government and religion. Then in each paragraph, what did the restoration settlement do about those problems? So you could do something like, I have got a plan for this. I could maybe look it up if I have time. It's kind of, so problems of government and religion. So you could talk about kind of, in terms of religion, it's like restoring Anglican supremacy. You could do kind of reducing Catholic influence, and then you'd say it really didn't do that. And then in terms of government, problems of government, the relationship between the monarch and parliament, the power balance, you could talk about that. What did the restoration settlement do? To what extent was that a short-term solution? Did it resolve those issues? So that's what I would do. I'd look at different kind of problems of government and religion. Off the top of my head, government is about the power balance, the relationship between the monarch and parliament. Religion, I'd probably do dealing with non-conformity and the kind of Clarendon Code stuff, and then maybe reducing Catholic influence. So I'd probably do 1 on government, 2 on religion, I think. I hope that's okay. So in terms of criteria, think of criteria as the basis for your argument. Why is your argument the case? And I have actually got a video on that where I talk about that, which spends more time on it than I could go into in this live session. So it's just about the basis for your argument. Why is your argument the case? That's the easiest way to think about criteria. Yeah, that's but I'll go into it in more detail in the video. So if you just have a look at my channel, you'll see it. Well, good luck, Logan, with your exams. Best of luck with it all. So let's have a look. Really interesting question on kind of exam technique from Sophie. Do we always need to write 3 main paragraphs? If it's an agree disagree question, would 2 paragraphs suffice? Yeah, it would. And I've looked at different examiners reports where it's actually given a top level exemplar with only 2 paragraphs and then a conclusion. So you can, I think as a rule of thumb, as a general rule, I always think 3 is good because you kind of get that broad coverage. Obviously, if you just do 2 paragraphs, you're going to need more than 3 pieces of evidence per paragraph. But you can do that. And if you're in the exam and you think, I can't think of 3 paragraphs, you can just do 2. One thing I've noticed about the Stewart paper is there hasn't been a lot of comparison questions, comparing factor, or there's only been that one comparing time periods of the personal rule to the republic. So there could be a comparison question comparing different monarchs, something about the stability of different monarchs, or different factors, that kind of thing. Now you can do it just 1 paragraph on one paragraph on the other, but obviously with that you've got to make sure, if you just do those 2 paragraphs, make sure that you do compare within. That's really, really important. Okay, let's have a look here. See, so this is just what I'm talking about. So well timed, Hannah. What would the structure be like for a question? To what extent was development of banking insurance more important than changing cloth trade to the success of the economy? So this kind of question hasn't come up yet. So there's 2 ways of doing it. Either you do paragraph 1 on banking and insurance, a big paragraph. So you're only going to do 2 paragraphs. So, kind of 4 or 5 pieces of evidence, big paragraph on banking and insurance, and then a second paragraph on cloth. And then, but you're going to have to compare within, and your summaries are really important. Your conclusions really important. I have heard people say you could potentially bring something else in as an alternative. You could do that if you thought, actually, I want to talk about kind of overseas, especially with those two in particular. Overseas links to both of them, doesn't it? So you could potentially do a 3rd paragraph on overseas and say, actually, and then your analysis wouldn't be necessarily that overseas is more important, but overseas shows that banking and insurance was more important than cloth, maybe. So you could do it like that. Paragraph 1 banking, paragraph 2 cloth. If you wanted to do a 3rd on kind of overseas to kind of illustrate both of those, you could. Or you could just do those first 2. Although I do quite like the overseas question. I just came up with that. I quite like it. Or what you can do with the comparison questions is do it thematically. With this one, it's a little bit more tricky, but you can think of 3 different ways to assess the success of the economy. So it could be something like profit. It could be something like how widespread it was, how new it was, that kind of thing. And then paragraphs on each of those comparing banking to cloth. That's really complicated though. So I think I'd go for the first suggestion for that. Hope that's okay. How much detail do you need to know about each radical group? So just really, really quickly off the top of my head, I'd say levelers, you need to know Putney debates, mutiny at Burford, agreement of the people. That's probably enough. Hopefully that's going to be okay for you. The diggers, I'd talk about the in Surrey in 1649, the commune in Surrey. The fifth monarchists, I would talk about in the nominated assembly in 53, and I'll talk about Venner's uprising in 61. The Quakers, you could talk about the growth of the Quakers in 1650s, the Quaker Act of 62, George Fox being in prison 64 to 66. There's a little bit more on the Quakers, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. But something like that, that's probably enough. So I hope that's okay. Do you think there's enough to sell it? Yeah, I think there could be a question just on the growth of poverty. I think it could be just poverty, or maybe just the poor, lives of the poor, something like that, where you could talk about different causes different aspects of lives, things that changed the lives of the poor, like legislation, population growth, kind of economic change. So you could get one that covers kind of both questions in that way. Economic change could come into it. So you could get one on the poor. Growth of poverty, that would be narrow potentially, but I'd be surprised. Let's have a look. for interpretations questions, does it make sense to write that? I would do it by historians. I don't know. Writing it thematically. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I would do it by. That's always worked. That's always worked for me. Okay, so I would do it by historian. That's what I would say for that. Have a look at my video on interpretations if you haven't already. Freddie, exacerbated is a good one. Yeah, where the exacerbated. I'm gonna get, if the channel goes, if it goes kind of viral, I'm gonna get some t-shirts made up with these key, like catalyst, symbolic, exacerbated. Thanks so much, Frankie. That's very kind. If, let me just read through this. If given one factor in question, can you make the main paragraph about that period as, yeah. So if you've got a question on the Toleration Act, I think it's entirely valid to talk about the kind of slightly broader context of the Toleration Act, the Republic, the world turned upside down, execution of the king. For the Clarendon Code, or sorry, if it's active uniformity, talk about, I think you can. And when you look at civil rights as well, there are examples of that, like that question. Sorry for people who don't do civil rights, but that question, topic 2, Plessy versus Ferguson, you can talk about the other cases there. So yeah, I think you can. Let's have a look. Great. This is a good question, Minna. Who would you say to blame for failure to reach negotiated settlement? I would say 40 to 42. It's very close call between Charles and Parliament. I might say to begin with, it's maybe Parliament in the very early 1640s. They come at Charles, don't they? They arrest Wentworth and impeach him and cut off his head. And I think that's a little bit mean. Sorry, I should be a little bit more formal. Yeah. So and then Charles obviously tries to arrest the 5 MPs. So it's kind of a reaction. They're very reacting. By the end, I would say it's the army. Pride's purge, absolutely crucial in the trial and the execution of the king. Probably overall Charles, but the end, I would say the army is very, very important because of Pride's purge. But even then, if Charles had accepted the legitimacy of the trial, could he have survived? Maybe. So I'd maybe come down on Charles, but I do think that the army is really important. I think the Parliament's power kind of declines as time goes on, I think. Let's have a look. Lucille, for an essay on the survival of dissent, what evidence would use in a paragraph on the actions of dissenters? So this is about the kind of strength of feeling. I think you could talk about how I would actually go back to 1650 Toleration Act and talk about how there was a decade of toleration, which allowed dissent to grow, to form networks, and then make it much more difficult to kind of, as I said, put the lid on them, with the Clarendon Code. And George Fox, particularly, I think you would talk about how he was imprisoned, and then he came out and kind of reorganized the Quakers. That's what I would kind of talk about in that one. I hope that's kind of enough, but I think it's okay. I think it's valid to go back there. So, Minna, reasons why the interpretations might differ in C: focus, scope. They are usually, that's it. What are they focusing on? One is normally focusing on one thing, 2 is focusing on another. One's looking at 88 and 89 alone. The other one's talking about 88, 1701, something like that. That usually does the trick. Sorry, I'm going pretty quick, but I hope this is all okay. Threats to the church. In threats, yeah, definitely. Threats, yeah, definitely. The monarch and the actions of the monarchs, for sure. Declarations of indulgence, really, really, that was a challenge, definitely. Yeah, good thinking. 3 is fine. 4 doesn't get you more marks. 3, 20 out of 20. I've seen my students getting 20 out of 20, 3 paragraphs. That's what I always kind of say. So, it's about the analysis. That's the key. So, the key, analysis, weighing up at the end of each paragraph, that kind of stuff. I think, Olivia, giving an answer to Lucille. So brilliant. This is great, folks. I love it. It's a little bit of a kind of community forming, helping each other. What we need to write about banking and insurance, goldsmith bankers, money scriveners, marine insurance, fire insurance. They're the big ones. The details I'm sure you'll have, but that's what I would say. And then making links, as I said before, to kind of investment in kind of national markets, overseas, and things like that. Let's have a look. Could there be a question? Yeah, cloth, definitely there could be a question. Cloth hasn't come up yet. And I think you need to look at the different ways that cloth might have transformed. You could talk about something like immigration. You could talk about overseas trade and the Navigation Acts potentially. And then you talk about kind of new techniques. That would be the three kind of things I would talk about. So I don't like using the word prediction, but if you look at things that haven't come up for a while, you know, I mentioned 40 to 49. Topic 2 has hardly come up at all. So I would get to know topic 2. Make sure you revise topic 2. The Clarendon Code hasn't really come up. I am wary of saying kind of predictions specifically because I don't want somebody to come back and, although I did look on YouTube and it seems like a lot of people do that, but I just don't want people to get upset with me. I prefer just to say, look at the specification, look at the past questions, and look at what hasn't come up. So, you know, the time periods last year, you know, what was it? It was the personal rule and the Republic. So look at the other time. I mean, it could be another question on personal rule, could be another question on the Republic. So my advice, Mary, is all past questions, plan them and memorize all the past question plans. And then look at what hasn't come up, look at the specification and make up questions for that. But I think we've gone through a few here. Clarendon Code, cloth, what else did we say? 40 to 49, you know, those kind of things, I think definitely, you know, that haven't come up. And there's another answer to Lucille by Kelsey. That's great. Quaker reorganization. Richard Franklin, good one. Yeah, Joseph Wilson, brilliant. Really good. Let's have a look here. If you're able to, you might get something. My advice on, if you don't think you're going to be able to finish and you're kind of in paragraph 2, write a conclusion. Conclusions are really important. So I would definitely kind of go for that. You know, you might get some marks for a plan, but I would say, you know, as I said to somebody before, I think it's really important to kind of plan out your answer before you start writing. Keep an eye on the clock. 5 minutes to plan, 40 minutes to write for sections A and B. For C, it might take 10 minutes to plan and 35 minutes to write. Just stick to those times. I'm sure you can do it. You know, you're going to have the adrenaline in the exam. You know, you're going to be revised. You know, you can do it. So I think the nature of the debate for section C is really kind of understanding why the extracts differ on their arguments, but also on what they're focusing on, what the scope is on, what scope they have potentially. So I would say that that's what it's all about, just understanding how and why they differ. And I've got a video on interpretation, so have a look at that if you haven't already. That's what I would say to look at. But the nature of the debate is just how and why the extracts differ. Hope that's okay. So in terms of Pride's Purge, I could probably spend an hour talking about that, but I won't. Just quickly, I mean, so Pride's Purge basically removes all of the moderates from Parliament. So it leaves the Rump, and that allows for the trial and execution of the king to go ahead. So in terms of significance, it shows that by the end of 1648, the army are the dominant political force in the country. That's one reason why it's significant. Another reason why it's significant is that it, as I said, it allows for the trial and execution of the king. And the issue with that is that then Parliament has kind of lost its legitimacy in a way, because it's not representative. There's swathes of the country that don't have political representation because they've been kicked out. The Rump isn't all the MPs. So that means that the Republic from even before it was a republic kind of lacks that legitimacy. And it also shows the kind of the power of the army and Cromwell's future reliance on the army. So Pride's Purge is really, really important. Cromwell, maybe the army. I mean, Cromwell's reliance on the army. I think the army's important there. Cromwell obviously, does make some decisions which are which come back to kind of haunt him, and but he's very reliant on the army. And every time there's an attempt at a new political settlement, I would argue that the army come in and kind of undermine that. So I hope that's okay. For example, with the instrument of government or rule of the major generals. Ironically, what is it that ends the republic? It's the army, monks' intervention. So ironically, the army are the group that have kind of undermined it all along, and then in the end, they're the ones who bring back the monarchy. Imperial expansion is kind of just overseas trade. So you could talk about North American colonies. You could talk about triangular trade. You could talk about the East India Company. Is there anything else? The Caribbean as well. Maybe you could link to like Anglo-Dutch rivalry as well in that. Can you mention pride? Yeah, Jerin, that's a really good point. My understanding, and people probably know if you've seen my channel, like I have, been an examiner, and I'm going to be an examiner again this year, that, as long as the evidence you use is relevant to the period in question. If it's from 1 year before, prize purchase December 1648, and it's a question 1649 to 1660, that's relevant. Like I said, the kind of legitimacy of the republic is kind of undermined. So I would definitely say that that's fine to do that. As long as you explain why it's relevant in that period. There you go. Sparkle Unicorn just gave a good explanation of Pride's Purge. Okay. Spark Unicorn, when's the history A-level exam? Does anybody know? Put the answer in the chat. How would you define transformation? What could we say? I don't know. Widespread, unprecedented, long-term, those kind of things. I'm only kidding, Spark Unicorn. I feel a bit bad. It's Wednesday, I think, isn't it? Wednesday. So transformation, I would, that's the kind of thing. Widespread, unprecedented, long-term. So it's a really significant change, isn't it? Theo, get from C from you with 3 days revision. I believe in you, Theo. You're in the right place. Do I have to pick a preferred extract? So you're going to say which one? So you answer the question, how convincing is the view in question? And then, if the other one's more convincing, so you will say, you should say in the conclusion, like overall, like, the view in extract 1 is largely convincing, somewhat convincing, whatever, partially convincing, not convincing. And then what about extract 2? So you will say which one is most convincing for sure. The Irish Rebellion, 1641, that creates this mass kind of panic about Catholicism in England. And it's one of the causes of the actions of Parliament in their very kind of antagonistic actions towards Charles and Charles's advisors. And also this is really the cause of Cromwell's actions in 1649 when he goes to Ireland and kind of massacres Irish Catholics at Drogheda and Wexford. So the Irish Rebellion, I would say, is useful in showing the kind of heightened fear of Catholicism, and also catalyzes that political division in England, I would say. I hope that's okay. How do you link cloth trade with imperial expansion? So navigation acts make sure that the raw materials from the colonies come to England, and those raw materials could benefit the cloth trade. So if you think about cotton, for example, that would therefore benefit the cloth trade. Also, overseas expansion, new markets. So you've got colonies being developed that then you sell the cloth to. That's how kind of imperialism works. So the raw materials would come from the colonies, be manufactured in England, and then be sold back to the colonists. So Mary, we talked about this a little bit before, but kind of, I think like, kind of catalyst, widespread, long-term analytical words. What else have we got? Put some in, folks. What are your favorite analytical words? Put them in the chat. I'm excited to see. What else do I like? Exacerbated. Talked about that before. Let's have a look.
could extend a little bit on the army's direct intervention in the Republic's attempts at Parliament. So we've got obviously we've got before the Republic, we've got Pride's Purge. Dissolving of the Rump, when Cromwell goes to the Rump. I just read a book about the Republic. I won't get it down, but just read a book recently. Cromwell goes to the Rump, orders them to dissolve, and somebody speaks up and says, on whose authority? And he's got soldiers with him, and he's like, this is my authority. So you could talk about Cromwell and link that to the army dissolving the Rump. You've also got John Lambert, Major General John Lambert's Instrument of Government in 1654. Then because of Penruddock's uprising in 55, you get the rule of the Major General. So you could talk about that and how unpopular that was. Again, that linked with the lack of legitimacy for the Republic means it's very unpopular. Then you could talk about how the army influenced Cromwell to not take the crown as part of the Humble Petition in 1657. Then you can talk about how the army didn't like Richard Cromwell. Obviously, you'd have to say something else that, he lacked support from the army in 58, 59, and then Monk's intervention. So you can see it's almost every year the army are doing something to undermine the legitimacy. Yeah, I think there could be a question on 25 to 29. Yeah, I think there could. So revise that. How does the instrument of government lead to instability? I don't think in itself it led to instability, but it's another example of a political settlement during the Republic that ultimately didn't succeed. I mean, I think it's just another example of a political settlement, this frequent change of government, which created this kind of heightened instability. So do I need a lot of knowledge for section C? I would just organize it in terms. Sorry, I'm going really quick now to try and get through this. So I would just go through the bullet points on the specification. So changing powers of monarch, parliament, end of Anglican supremacy, and financial revolution, and just put evidence almost for and against each of those. So just look at the specification. What criteria would you use for, things like unpopularity, rebellions and uprisings, divisions between the monarch and parliament, that things that created those would therefore be the most likely cause of instability. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, you do get as far as that, unless things have changed, in since COVID kind of thing. I'm pretty sure you do get a breakdown. Your school definitely does. Identifying an underpinning factor is quite good. Yes, that's good advice, Olivia. Well, topic one or topic question. Yeah, I would, Theo, I'd really advise to revise it all just in case. I really just think just look at some of those past question papers. Some of them have been really narrow, and it's better to revise all of it. And you might have your areas of strength and things that you prefer, but yeah, I'd probably advise to revise all of them. Just use those past questions. Just revise using the past questions. Do the essay plans for all the past questions. That'll be my advice. Right, I think I'm at the bottom of the questions. I can't believe it. This is the last one on there. So there's a couple of minutes left. Any final questions, get them in. Anything at all. How successful do you think William was bypassing Parliament during his rule? Also, heightened tensions is my favorite. Okay. How successful was William at bypassing Parliament during his rule? Well, yes, I think he was to some extent, but I think after the 9 Years' War finishes, they certainly gained the upper hand, I would say. I think if you just look at what happens in the late 90s, where they really do start to rein him in, which kind of culminates in the Act of Settlement. So I would say maybe during the war, he's able to do that. But not really by the end of by 1701. I don't think he's necessarily as effective at doing that. Hope that's okay. I was a little bit vague on that one, but I hope that's okay. Significance of the East India Company, profit, development of overseas trade. Yeah, that's what I would kind of say. It's just profitable, develops. It's an example of the growing overseas expansion. That's what I think you would use that for, really. So yeah, I mean, there's probably enough on there. There was a past question, wasn't there, with East India Company as the focus, as a factor. So that's something to kind of maybe plan that one out and think of 3 precise pieces of evidence. There's definitely enough in the textbook on that. This is a good question. If I get a year wrong from an act, will I be punished for it? No, you're not punished for it. What it is as an examiner, you're just told if there's a kind of factual mistake, you just ignore that. So if it's just a date that's wrong, you just ignore the date. So if you said, you know, the Petition of Rights 1626 instead of 1628, that would just be like you wrote the Petition of Right without a date. So it's not a massive thing. If you get them all wrong, then that might show that you don't have a kind of good handle on it. But if you one or two slight mistakes like that is not going to make a big difference. Definitely not. Right. Let's have a look. Where's the specification? Right, Theo, I was going to search for it there. But if you just search in on Google, Edexcel A-level history specification, and there's a PDF which is like 700 pages long, and you just do a search for 1C. It is 1C, isn't it? Britain 1625 to 1701, and on that it's got the specification, the breakdown. If you haven't already, have a look at my videos, because I do use the specification quite a lot on the content. It's a good question, Kit. I'm just kind of seeing how it's going, and then I'll look at getting some t-shirts and mugs and things printed up. But any suggestions for merch that people would like? I don't know what else we could have, t-shirts and kind of mugs and stuff like that. Just let me know, and I'm really up for it. Right. What was more significant, changing cloth trade or banking and insurance? Well, again, this is your interpretation, but I would say if you look at cloth and look at the amount of cloth that was exports, that was actually declining in this period, whereas banking and insurance was growing. So cloth did still dominate, but banking and insurance was growing. So what was more significant? I suppose it depends what we mean by significant, doesn't it, on profit. I mean, the other thing I suppose is banking and insurance helped other areas of the economy to grow. So perhaps it would be easier to argue that, perhaps. So society questions. I've done this a few times, but I'll do it again just quick. So if it's like structure of society, I'd probably do it by the different groups, like poor, women, gentry, nobility, merchants, professional class, that kind of thing. If it's on causes of societal change, the factors, kind of war, legislation, population growth, ideas. That's how I would and that's how I do my revision as well. Oh my gosh, now you're asking, what did Wentworth do in Ireland? So Wentworth, I think for what you need to know, actually, just for what you need to know for this exam, is that he was Charles's advisor, the Lord Deputy of Ireland. What you need to know in terms of just for this exam is just the idea that he had this idea in the late 1630s about using the Irish Catholic army against opponents, and Parliament took that to mean against them. And so that's what they used to kind of try and impeach him, and eventually that act of attainder. That's what you need to know about Wentworth. That's the extent of it. I can't imagine you would need to talk about his actions, like what he was doing in Ireland. Okay, imperial expansion. I think this might be the last question. So if anybody's got any final things, please put it in there, and then I need to bring this to a close. So if you were going to talk about imperial expansion, what points could you make? Because I feel there are loads. You've got to think about what if you're doing one paragraph on imperial expansion as a kind of cause of economic change. You've got to think about what's most useful, what's most effective. So something like we talked about the East India Company, Anglo-Dutch rivalry, North America and Jamaica. I think you're going to have to think about kind of obviously triangular trade. What are the most useful for this specific question? So yeah, there are loads, but you don't have to mention everything. Just think what's the most useful. Yeah, I mean, it really, and also things that can link to maybe other factors. What else can I link to? So, if you talk about kind of Navigation Act or North American colonies, maybe, as I said, with that you could potentially link to cloth trades, so things like that. Maybe think about what else you can link to. Okay, just got a couple more questions, and then I'll probably draw it to a close. What's the significance of the exclusion crisis? Massive, huge significance. I mean, a big thing to talk about, if you haven't already, listen to the In Our Time, BBC In Our Time on the Popish plot, right? If you haven't listened to that, listen to the BBC In Our Time on the Popish plot. 45 minutes. You're not going to regret it. It really, really helps you understand. So Popish plot, this really heightened fear of Catholicism, 1678 to 81. As a result of that, one result of that is this exclusion crisis, where Parliament try and pass this bill to exclude James, who's Charles II's brother, from the throne. And James at this point is publicly Catholic. People know this. So this is the reason why Parliament wants to kind of exclude him. As a result of this, it's slightly more detailed, but just briefly, as a result of this, Charles dissolves Parliament Charles II dissolves Parliament in 1681 and rules alone until his death in 1685. So it really does show that the breakdown of relations between the monarch and Parliament, and it shows the kind of wider fear of Catholicism. So the exclusion crisis, there's so much there. And if you think about causes, events, consequences, that could almost be the focus of a whole paragraph. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a kind of a focus of a question. How far do you agree that the exclusion crisis was the most important cause of breakdown of relations between the monarch and Parliament 60 to 85? Maybe, it could. There's so much to say about it, but just think cause, event, consequence. Okay. Okay, I think this might be the last one. Quite a nice one to end on. So thanks, Ian, for this. Good question. Thanks for the feedback. I'm pleased the videos have been helpful. What 3 factors would you do for the question, why did Charles embark on personal rule? So, if it's a kind of political instability question on that period, I think you've always got religion. You've always got, finance. I know that finance is probably more an effect of the personal rule rather than a cause, but maybe actions of Parliament, actions of Charles, and you could talk about kind of divine right, that kind of thing. So I would say kind of maybe religious issues. You could talk about actions of the king and actions of Parliament. Maybe why did Charles embark on personal rule? It's a good question. That, yeah, maybe actions of Parliament, actions of the king, maybe religion, and talk about how they led to each of those led to the breakdown of relationship between the monarch and Parliament, which caused the personal rule. That's how I would kind of do it. All right, folks, thank you so much for coming along and all the questions. I hope that was useful. Best of luck with the exam. All the videos are there, and just make sure, last advice, make sure you plan your essays before you write them. Stick to the time as best you can, and best of luck. And as I've said, I will hopefully be doing one of these for paper 3 before paper 3. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and really good luck. Best of luck with it. All right. Goodbye. Thank you.